Good morning, good afternoon, good night. For all of you, thanks so much for joining this webinar on designing virtual exchange for adult and graduate learners. My name is Younus Mirza. I'm the director of the Brzezinski Institute for Global Virtual Learning here at Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, not too far away from Washington, D.C. The mission of the Brzezinski Institute for Global Virtual Learning is that we collaborate with institutions of higher education around the world to explore the similarities and differences in their missions and practices, to understand the challenges that they face and to create solutions in light of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have three different pillars. The first pillar is COIL, or Collaborative Online International Learning. We have active training. Here at Shenandoah, one of our COIL trainers and consultants, Alanna, maybe you could just wave your hand, is here. She helps conduct that training, and we have faculty that go through the training in our spring and fall semesters. As many of you know, COIL virtual exchange is when faculty in one country work with another faculty member in another country, and they create a shared module in their classes where their students interact and develop a shared project. The second pillar we have is service learning, where we try to engage our students outside the classroom in virtual exchange. And we just are wrapping up our project on Zero Hunger with the university in Jordan, Yarmouk. And we developed a Zero Hunger project where we surveyed our local food banks and tried to examine and see how we can best serve our various clientele. And our last pillar is our conference and showcase pillar. And this webinar is part of that pillar, where we try to highlight and showcase some of the things that we're involved with and participating. We are fortunate to have around 100 faculty members now trained in COIL and virtual exchange, and they're doing a lot of amazing and exciting things, and we want to highlight some of those accomplishments. So one of them is Professor Catherine Shiffman, who has been one of our COIL stars. She has written and published on COIL virtual exchange, and she's incorporated it in her discipline on education leadership. She's going to present for half an hour approximately, and then we'll open up for discussion regarding her presentation and her paper. So, Catherine.
Thank you, Younus, and thank you. I'd like to thank the Brzezinski Institute for their support in my work with virtual exchange, both in actually practicing it and then some of my research work. Thank you for your time, whether it's morning, noon, or night. For those of you who are fasting, thank you for your attention. I hope I don't put you to sleep. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about virtual exchange design for adult and graduate learners, both from research and some from my own practice. So I recently published a literature review on that, so a lot of this will come from that. So let me first tell you a little bit about me. I am and why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I work with graduate and adult learners. My students are in a doctoral program, so they have extensive experience in their profession. They're more mature, and they have busy lives. They're working full-time, attending class in the evenings or weekends, and they've got a lot of different responsibilities. So I wanted to figure out how to do this better with my students, because I see a real opportunity for giving them an international learning experience. So a little bit about what I've done in terms of implementing COIL in my coursework. I've implemented 3 of my required courses, and I did that in collaboration with a colleague at the University of Sarajevo. And then I am in the process of doing a couple of elective courses where we're combining the COIL with an in-person component. So I sort of have a philosophy of continuous improvement in my teaching and instruction. So this has sort of been a very engaging piece for me. As I get started, a few terms, I just want to clarify how I'm using them in this presentation. When I talk about graduate, I'm talking about, which is the term we use in the US, but that would also refers to postgraduate, which is used in other countries. Basically anything that's above a bachelor's degree. When I'm talking about adults, I'm talking about adults who are 25 years and older. And often graduate and adult, those are the same people, but not always. Particularly in the United States, we're seeing more adults enrolling in bachelor degree programs, for instance. And then I'm using the umbrella term of virtual exchange to capture COIL as well as some other models that are out there. So basically, I'm using a virtual exchange is the kinds of exchanges that are using technology to facilitate interaction, exchange ideas, foster collaboration between faculty and staff who are located in different countries. Okay, so why should we care? Why should we design international virtual exchange for adults and for graduate learners? I see it as a real opportunity. We have graduate study involves advanced training for professionals. These are the people that are being trained to be experts in their field. They're going to need to collaborate with international colleagues, and they're going to be modeling, mentoring, and leading others. So giving adults and graduate learners these experiences will strengthen their roles as professions and strengthen the profession, in my opinion. I think it's also a question of access. There's low participation of graduate learners in international study, mobility. So this is a way to remove some of those financial and logistical barriers for adults specifically. Not all of them, as we'll talk about, but some. And then virtual exchange really sort of aligns well, is a type of experiential learning, and experiential learning can be quite powerful in all learning, but for adults in particular, those who are bringing specialized knowledge and prior experience, they can sort of reflect on that experience in these international encounters that can happen in powerful ways. So there's adult learning theory can help us in thinking about how to design learning and for adults generally. We'll apply this to virtual exchange, but what do we need to think about when we're working with adult learners? They have, by virtue of their age, far more life experience and professional experience that they are bringing to bear on whatever learning they are participating in. They also have more established understandings of their world as they see it and themselves. They tend to be highly goal-driven, and they have very more specific or articulated goals for why they're participating in learning, why they're pursuing graduate study, for instance. And they need to be able to see how what they are learning has relevance to those goals. And the adult learners are far more autonomous. Unlike school children, if they're not enjoying or seeing the relevance to what they're learning, they can walk. They can learn, leave the program, leave the course. And then there are the practical constraints. Adults tend to have a lot more responsibilities than younger children. Again, balancing workload, employment, families, and other community responsibilities. So what do we know about virtual exchange for graduate and adult learners? I would argue not enough. A recent study of the field by the Stevens Initiative found that 7.2% of providers were offering virtual exchange to graduate students, so it's less prevalent. And then it's under research. We just don't know. There's not enough research yet on how to do this and how to do it well. So being the academic, I decided to do a literature review to answer those questions for my own professional learning as a professor, but also I felt this could benefit the field to understand what's out there on best practices, or what do we know about how to design virtual exchange for adults and graduate learners? So these were the questions that guided my literature review. What are the characteristics that you see in these virtual exchanges designed for graduate and adult learners? What are the learning goals, the kinds of structures and activities that are set up to realize those goals? What kinds of outcomes are reported for students? And then what insights are embedded in this research about adult learner experiences? So those were the questions that guided me. And as others who've done literature reviews in virtual exchange have found, it's a tricky endeavor. I'm not sure I'm going to do it again, but I did it. Because you have people publishing and presenting research in different languages, different countries, and different disciplines. So it's a rapidly evolving field. So it's sort of a continually it's a challenging body of literature to get a handle on, but that also makes it interesting, I guess. So these were the criteria that I used to guide my selection. I'll just highlight a few key ones. I decided to look at a 10-year span, figuring 2011, starting in 2011, maybe I could argue technology was sort of getting closer to where we are today. I only looked at English language sources, so that's a limitation of this study. And so keep that in mind when we look at some of the results. I looked at only peer-reviewed subjects, and then I was looking for criteria. I was looking for sources that were focused in which the majority of students were graduate students. Once I sort of had that set of sources narrowed down, I further refined it. I was interested in those kinds of virtual exchanges that were embedded in courses versus non-course, like an extracurricular activity, a volunteer experience. I was interested in the sources that provided information on the student, what they learned and their experience with it, rather than say how the instructor experienced or how the initiative got started. And then I focused on research-oriented or practitioner journals, but not the public, popular sources. And then I focused on specific exchanges so I could learn more details about them rather than, say, large-scale studies across multiple exchanges, multiple universities, et cetera. And then I did not look at other literature syntheses. I won't go into this, but these are the procedures I used. I drew on the Prisma flow diagram for conducting systematic literature review, and then the modifications you can see in the right-hand column are additional steps I had to take because of how little I could find using the formal review process. So what did I end up with? Just 16 sources for analysis, 14 journal articles, 2 book chapters. These were a combination of research studies and project descriptions. What's not included, again, non-English sources are not included. And I think what I'd like to say on the varied purposes, particularly those that were research studies, were providing information, data relevant to those research questions. So that's the kind of data I could look at, whatever the research question happened to be. So this will just give you a sense of where these exchanges, which countries these exchanges were coming from. The US appeared most often. That could be a factor of my English language sort of literature search, but that's consistent with, say, the Stevens Initiative's field report recently that showed the US as a prominent a prominent user of virtual exchange, but there are others that I would expect to see that appear in the broader virtual exchange field as being active in virtual exchange, such as Mexico, Brazil. There was one from Brazil, and the Middle East. Not so much from the Middle East here. Also, a variety of virtual exchange terms that are used, and that's pretty consistent with the broader field. Telecollaboration appears frequently. That's coming from the language disciplines. And the language disciplines have a long history in virtual exchange. Another source, you see COIL there, and then another set of sources that I found useful in thinking about adults and graduates was this term global virtual teams. It tended to come more from business-oriented sources, but the focus on teams I found quite helpful for thinking about more mature learners. And then you can see there are a variety of other terms. So it's a difficult topic, I would say, to get a total handle on. Okay, where were these exchanges appearing? Education and the language fields were prominent. So, and particularly teaching language. So TEFL or TESOL, teaching English as a foreigner language, appeared frequently. There was a heavy representation of virtual exchange happening in education fields. In looking at the kinds of matches, disciplinary matches between the two or more partner courses, the majority were either in the same discipline or a closely related one. There were 4 that were multidisciplinary. I think that the multidisciplinary collaborations are more prominent probably in the undergraduate, but perhaps less so in the adult and graduate fields. And looking at what kinds of goals were appearing for these graduate learners, they were multiple and often interconnected. So particularly, let's say you have a goal of intercultural understanding, then the digital technology piece, developing digital technology skills, is supporting the intercultural understanding. Strong emphasis on professional preparation in these goals and specific to that profession, right? So, and I think that's maybe a key takeaway from this is the importance and the need to make this highly specialized to the profession. And you can see there's a different emphases that show up. The actual structure and activities are fairly similar to what you see in the broader virtual exchange field. You see a length of 6 to 13 weeks. You see some relationship building activities, putting people in intercultural groups or teams, activities to encourage interaction, and then a reflective component. And then a combination of synchronous and asynchronous encounters. So what kinds of evidence were people drawing on? Multiple sources, which I think add some strength to the findings, largely qualitative. So I think what is helpful about that in thinking about designing for adult and graduate learners is you can gather a fair amount of information on the processes and how students were experiencing those processes of participating in a virtual exchange that you might not find from a single sort of pre-post analysis of change. Largely, the evidence was coming from instructor or student generated assessments or tools. There were 4 that actually used validated instruments. Overall, I would say the sources indicate a general positive response to for graduates to the experience and or the learning. But there would be caveats to that. So some of the sources might have focused on just one course of the two course partnership, right? Or one intercultural team. So generally some satisfaction, but again, it depends on where the focus is. Not surprisingly, the kinds of learning outcomes that were reported align with the goals in the intercultural domain, focus on individual self-awareness, changes in individual self-awareness, and the teamwork development and functioning, the intercultural teamwork development and functioning. And for those with an interest in digital and technology skills, that was also seen as an outcome. There's a variation in the outcomes between the partner courses in several cases, and some of the explanation provided centered on differences in preparation for the experience. So what about adult learning and learners? I didn't see a strong focus on adults as learners in this experience. There are a few references to adult learning theorists or paradigms, but not a lot. So there, in a few cases, adult learner characteristics and challenges were cited as contributing to their experience in the virtual exchange. So for instance, one virtual exchange of family educators found that the author speculated that maybe it was the maturity and the extensive professional experience those learners were bringing to the exchange that supported or enhanced the intercultural knowledge they gained. In another collaboration, there were two master's level courses that were paired, one in France and one in Japan, but the students in those two courses had different levels of experience and motivation. So the students in the French course were younger, less experienced, and were very oriented towards getting the grade, whereas the Japanese students were working professionals with more clearly defined goals for how to how to participate in intercultural teams. And so that sort of created sort of a misalignment that the instructors needed to navigate. And there was only one mention of the challenge of balancing work and family schedules with a virtual exchange. So I'll share some implications I'm seeing both from that research and my own practice around designing virtual exchange for adult and graduate learners. I think there's a lot of it makes a lot of sense to think about who adult learners are in that virtual exchange. What are their preferences for learning? What are their realities? So I think thinking about and helping, and this is I think a key piece, helping the adult learners see why they're doing what they're doing, help them understand how the virtual exchange relates to their goals, help them engage and apply their prior knowledge and experience, reflect on their knowledge of themselves and their world. Again, as adults, we have more established beliefs, and a virtual exchange may call on adults to re-examine some of those prior beliefs or biases or whatever. And we need to think about how can we create a safe space for people to explore that in a way that will be constructive. Another design suggestion I see is managing expectations of the experience. So from my own foils, I have doctoral learners. They're highly motivated. They take tremendous pride in their projects, their assignments. And so I had to encourage them to redirect where they were going to put their focus on and tell them the final product, the final project, assignment didn't matter as much as the interaction they were having. And that was a hard shift sometimes. And then logistically, practically, how do we help adults participate in interactions? This is a challenge, particularly if you have working adults and you have time differences. So thinking through a variety of strategies to address that, such as planning meetings well in advance on weekends, finding weekend dates that would work for both parties, and then a variety of synchronous and asynchronous ways to interact, as well as thinking about putting those intercultural teams together and figuring out their own times to meet. But that, I think, is a challenge, particularly for the large synchronous meetings that you might be trying to do. Some of my takeaways, both from my review of the research as well as my own experience, is how important reflection is, and embedding that into a virtual exchange for adult and graduate learners. And I think this can be done, it can be done in a variety of ways. It can certainly be done in groups where, large groups where you're just debriefing about how it's going with their classmates. And you can do it individually in written reflections or discussion boards. But this can really help with some of the things I mentioned on the previous slide about how to connect what they're doing with their goals, with their professional and life experiences. And another piece that comes up is it can help with the intercultural team development when it's focusing on this as a process, working in teams, doing teamwork as a process, because that is working in groups or teams is always challenging, even when you have a shared culture or frame of reference, and it can be frustrating. So I think helping adults work through that and learn from that process by way of reflection can be quite productive. Some other strategies to support team development for adult learners, certainly doing things like needs assessments beforehand. I already talked about the reflections. And then, adults I work with like to be prepared. So giving them pre-readings and activities that address team development and function even before going into it, I think can help adult learners, because again, adult learners have less, they're very focused, can become impatient or frustrated about the experience without seeing how it connects. So in conclusion, in the literature scan I did, the prevalence of graduate-only exchanges appears to be low. And then in the literature review, the focus was really on preparation that's specific to that, excuse the typo, that profession. And a lot of commonalities with the virtual exchange that you see at other education levels, but little attention to adult learners' sort of needs, preferences, challenges is sort of a part of the background context, but not necessarily examined. So thinking about future needs and directions, I think we need to expand graduate to graduate level partnerships. I think we need to assist faculty to identify partners in their specific fields. And then we need more research, guidance, and models that design virtual exchange specifically for adults and graduate learners. And then this is another piece, that application to professional practice. I think that we could really do more there in understanding how can a virtual exchange lessons from a virtual exchange be applied to professional practice. And with that, I will say thank you for your time. and I look forward to a discussion. First, I'll just point out these are the sources that were included in the literature review for anyone who's interested there. It's a useful list to reference if you're interested in
Thank
designing.
you, Kathy. I always love a good literature review. So we will open the floor for questions. I'm sure Younus and I have some, but we want to give everyone a chance to give their comments and questions to Kathy. So at this time, feel free to unmute yourself or put questions in the chat.
Can I say something?
Please.
Thanks for the presentation. Excellent. I also love a literature review. I think it opens a lot of eyes for things that we need in terms of sometimes connecting the dots of certain things that we're not aware of. So if somebody does the hard work in front of us, it does smooth the way after that. I don't have any research done on the field, but I have a lot of my institution focuses on undergraduate studies, but we make a point of bringing this to the furthest corners of São Paulo state, exactly where education won't normally go. And so our students are a mix of young and older learners. And everything that you mentioned, it holds truth in terms of our students from my understanding. The only thing that I would like to add is this is completely and totally subjective here. I noticed that younger students have like apparently 3 modes. They are either pro a virtual exchange, con, but they also have a neither nor that depending on how the professor interacts or the partners interact in the other country, they can go either way. Adult learners seem to come, as you mentioned, with a very clear objective. And if internationalization is not in their horizon, they will definitely go against, and it takes a little longer to convince them, but once they're convinced, they're full supporters. So I think it would be interesting, at least in my institution, to explore this further in terms of how to motivate these students because they are normally serious influencers in the classroom because they have more experience. Our students tend to look up to them as reference, as models, role models. So they're normally the ones who are more engaged in the tasks. So just a comment.
Those are great comments. I agree with all of them. I think there's a lot of opportunities if you can help adult learners see the value of doing it and accept the frustration in being vulnerable, which you have to be in a virtual exchange, which can be harder for adults who are used to being in charge, perhaps more.
Any other questions or comments? I'm not sure how much you addressed this, but when we're talking about adult learners, like you mentioned, your students are around between the ages of in their 20s and 60s. In the literature, like to what extent did the authors like tease out like that age, like with, like at what point is a student an adult learner as opposed to like just a graduate student? Like how does age factor into these studies?
Well, I think other than the few that really directly talked about some of those adult learner characteristics, it was sort of a given of the context. There was maybe not as much reflection in the sources on who are these learners as adults. And some of the sources gave ages, but others did not. But they all identified their students as being in a graduate level course. I think particularly the study I referenced, that between the Japanese and the students in the Japanese and the French universities, illustrates some of the challenges when you have different levels of experience, with the more mature learners in Japan, again, having very, as the former speaker just mentioned, very targeted, specific goals for what they wanted to get out of this, and then getting frustrated with younger students who are more sort of interested in sort of student orientation. I want a good grade, you know. And then the source that looked at family educators, who also, these students had a lot of experience already working with families or working in school systems or in social work, that they were able to bring to bear in their exchange between American and Icelandic students. And that was seen to benefit their openness to engage with intercultural knowledge and to grow from the experience.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? I'm not sure if Younus mentioned in the introduction, but in addition to being a COIL trainer, administrator, I also work in the Center for Global Education, and with Dr. Shiffman and her co-author, Dr. Spencer, like I work with them in the COIL space, and then also with the faculty-led programs space as well. And you two have done one blended project where you did virtual exchange, and then you actually traveled to visit the COIL partners that you were working with. You're planning another trip in this spring. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that in terms of the adult learner population that you're working with, and how that's been to plan these hybrid blended learning experiences where there is physical travel involved.
Yeah, maybe before, just to piggyback on that question, I was really intrigued in your conclusion. You mentioned maybe having graduate to graduate school collaborations and partnerships. So maybe it sounds like you've been able to do some of this through the blended learning and through your global engaged study learning trips, so study abroad trips. So if you could speak more about that, how that's done. You know, do you recommend directors of international education at universities to try to seek out relationships? Is this something that directors of graduate programs like yourself do? Like, how does this actually work on the ground?
So one of my, what I suspect, still to be researched, I suppose, that when you, as you saw in the literature review, there was a heavy emphasis on learning outcomes related to intercultural self-awareness or team development, which is great. I suspect that when you can partner students in similar advanced students in similar disciplines together, you will also see increased focus on knowledge about the field, by being able to do more substantive comparisons. You know, this is how we offer special education in the state of Virginia versus how it's done in Australia or Western Australia. So last year, Vicki Spencer and I took a group of Shenandoah students to visit Curtin University in Perth in Western Australia, where they met with graduate students in education and leadership and special education. And we were able to put our students together in groups prior to meeting in person, around a common professional interest. such as, professional development for teachers or diagnosing special learning needs. And then once the students met in person, they could, it's sort of, there was already a foundation for a relationship, and then they were able to meet in person, talk further, develop a presentation over food and drink, and it was, an enjoyable experience. And then return home and create presentations about what they learned. So another presentation centered on, how do you provide professional learning for practicing school and district administrators. And so these, in one instance, this project resulted in the group presenting at a conference, developing a website for tools for a resource website. So one of my theories or hopes is also that when you can lay this kind of groundwork, these conversations could extend beyond the life of the COIL. So you are developing, again, in my perfect world, that you're developing a professional network that's international in scope.
Yeah, I love that point about network. Like, it's not just about exchanging, but you're expanding your professional network, and that can lead to different opportunities and jobs and career growth. So,
or sharing best practices or frustrations,
And it's also kind of making a case for more discipline to discipline COIL partnerships at the graduate level versus the undergraduate level, that at the undergraduate level, it's fun to pair these really like disparate disciplines and see what students can come up with. But at the graduate level, it would be like more pointed networking research opportunities if you did discipline to discipline.
I agree. I think there's value. I definitely think there's value in multidisciplinary exchanges. But I do know for the students I work with, I think I will get the most enhanced professional preparation by being able to pair them with students in a similar field and with similar levels of experience.
And with Younus's question about the different institutions that you're partnering with, have you noticed any differences so far with this group that you work with in Australia versus the university that you're doing in Scotland this year? So 2 different continents, and I mean, how have the experiences compared?
Well, the Scotland one is still under development, so I can report more by June. But I think it's a great opportunity for faculty to be collaborating, and I hope that there are opportunities for more partnering with faculty to the benefit of graduates and graduate programs. So, for instance, having guest speakers who can speak to your class. In one case, the Australian professor we partnered with, Cindy Smith at Curtin, is serving on the dissertation committee of one of my students, who came back and decided she wanted to do a comparative study of early access to special needs, special education services for young children. And she's comparing Virginia and Western Australia.
and any other thoughts or comments, questions before we wrap up? Yeah, please.
Do you have any experience on having students participating in 2 COILs? The same student participating in 2 COILs?
So in different, such as in different courses?
Yes, or different, replications of the same course.
So I was thinking about that this morning, actually. So I have some students who have participated in a required course and then participate in the elective that involved the in-person travel. And then I had the first COIL I did with my colleague in Sarajevo. was to do a coil that occurred over 2 semesters. So it was the same students, but they were together over probably, I guess, 9 months. So what do I take from that? What I'm still learning, right? I think the required, when they're doing it as part of a required course, you have to do more convincing and showing why it's relevant. But I think that's actually probably where it needs to be more than in the electives, where people are choosing they're already open and excited about intercultural learning and experiences. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just asking that because as our students in Brazil, they have like a fixed grid of disciplines. So once you start a program, you have like a fixed grid. So we can plan to have, for example, a coil in Portuguese, a coil in Spanish, a coil in English, a coil in, we can explore more intercultural competence in one coil and then do something a little more specific. And we have a person carrying out data analysis of our final surveys. And one of the most interesting things that this researcher found was that after 3 different coils, a person who participates in 3 different coils, the more they participate, the more they notice that their language improvements. We only looked at language improvements. So if you look at language improvements in the first coil, I don't remember the numbers, but it's something like 45 or 50%, saying, okay, it did improve. Then the second time around, it goes up to 60 something. And then the third time around, it goes up to 80. 85%. So it increased. So the more the more chances the person has of participating, he or she feels maybe more comfortable, more exposed, and understanding how coil works, he or she can take more advantage of the project.
That's really interesting. I'm going to keep an eye out for that with my students. We've decided in our Doctor of Education program, we've revised it recently, and we're intentionally embedding a global learning component now into the course, into the program, which will include COIL. So that'll be something. Thank you. That's something I'll look for.
All right, wonderful. I think oh yeah, Catherine.
There's also the learning curve of the instructor, right? So I get better, hopefully I'm getting better with each iteration, but so some of my students have been there when I'm just starting to learn how to do it. So that would be one challenge of comparing their growth and alongside my growth and learning how to do this.
So I think we're coming close to the hour. So yeah, Alanna, Kathy, or anyone else, any final thoughts or questions before we conclude? All right. So yeah, Alanna, anything Kathy you want to end with before we wrap up?
I just say thank you for sharing your time this morning, afternoon, or evening. It's lovely to meet you, and I'd be happy to chat further with anyone who's interested in design for graduate and adult learners.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, likewise. You know where to find us. All 3 of us are on LinkedIn, and if you haven't already subscribed to the Barzinji newsletter, Younus does a great job of sending out more information about all the events and happenings that we're doing. So just feel free to get in touch with us if you want to chat more about any of this stuff.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in our COIL workshop and training, definitely be in touch with Alanna and myself. And if you're interested in developing your graduate program and introducing virtual exchange, please be in touch with Kathy. I'll make sure to send out the recording of this as long as the article and whatever slides and visuals that are relevant. So wonderful. Thanks so much all for joining, and we look forward to being in touch. Goodbye.